Does the First Amendment pertain to illegal activities?
No. Well, it defines the scope of what is and what's not legal sometimes, for example. So the First Amendment, if there were a law that said it's illegal to talk to your neighbor, it's illegal to hand out pamphlets in support of Donald Trump, even though there's a law that says it's illegal to do criminality, the Constitution supersedes. And so to the extent that there's an application of law, for example, in the INA that purports to make something illegal, or it would have of no purchase if it conflicted with First Amendment precedent.
In this video, a progressive lawyer exposes Tim Pool's nonsense in this brutal debate showdown. So Tim throws out a simplistic question about whether the First Amendment applies to illegal activities, a move clearly meant to trip up or corner his guests. Good Logic, though, surprisingly jumps in with a flat no, which just honestly hands PiscoLitty, who's the progressive here, an opening on a silver platter. And from there, Pisco just breaks it down with a calm but pointed clarity. He exposes how both Tim and Good Logic are completely skipping over the actual function of constitutional law. The idea that a law becomes untouchable just because it makes something illegal is exactly why the Constitution exists, to set limits on what the government can criminalize. And instead of backing down, Pisco just keeps building, turning a supposed gotcha into a mini civics lesson that neither Tim nor Good Logic seems prepared for. So make sure to watch till the end to see how this progressive lawyer exposes Tim Pool's nonsense in this brutal debate showdown.
Did Mahmoud Khalil occupy any buildings illegally?
There's no allegation to that effect, and so why should we consider it? There's no allegation of that. In fact, there's reporting that says that he purposely did not attend any of these sit-ins for the reason of he's worried about the status of his green card.
I could be wrong, but there were conversations and videos, I believe, that showed Mahmoud Khalil inside buildings that had been under quote unquote student occupation.
At the time they were occupied, or any time?
At the time they were occupied.
Okay, well, listen,
I could be wrong though.
I read reporting that said that effectively that he was keeping away from those areas. But even if it were true, don't you agree that Trump, if he wants to do that, he should charge him with, or he should get someone to charge him with a crime? Because in this country, there's a line between admissibility, basis of removal and deportable basis of removal. And in order to be deportable on the basis of something like, for example, occupying a building, I assume he would need a conviction under that.
No.
Yeah.
I'll tell you right now, it would be much worse if Trump had charged him with a crime. If his DOJ went out and charged him with a crime, I would be much more bothered by the action because that would now be because that would be punishing him for his free speech. The Supreme Court has said definitively that deportation and removal is not considered a punishment. I urge you to check. I'll give you the citations. 525 U.S. 471. The case is Reno versus Anti-American Discrimination Committee or Commission. That case spells out very clearly. You cannot pretend, first and foremost, that it is considered criminal punishment, and also that he's held.
I agree that immigration is not a criminal punishment.
So that's
I totally agree that that's the precedent of the court.
So then ask yourself this: how is it a First Amendment violation at all?
First Amendment does not just arise under criminal actions. For example, if the government said that you can't get a liquor license if you're a Jew, or you can't get a liquor license if you support Trump, I think that you would agree that's not a criminal action, but the First Amendment still has purchase. And yes or no?
And that
yes?
again is
that
not
a yes?
bona fide.
Wait, is that yes?
You're trying to catch me on a gotcha moment. And what I'm saying
you just said it was only for criminal matters, and I just want to be clear to the audience: is it only for criminal matters?
What I'm saying is that with respect to someone who's an illegal alien, we are talking about whether or not it's bona fide, it's facially
He's not an illegal
bona fide
alien.
and legitimate.
He's not an illegal alien.
I'm saying is someone who's not an American citizen.
Man, Tim's already setting this up with that classic "I could be wrong" hedge. But come on. That whole move where he floats some vague idea about Mahmoud Khalil being seen in a building is just him trying to toss something out there without actually owning it. Pisco immediately pushes back okay, even if that were true, where's the charge? And that's the thing. Pisco's not even dodging. He's just giving a solid legal breakdown. There's a clear difference between being inadmissible and being deportable. And unless there's an actual conviction, none of this stuff would even hold up for removal under law. And then Good Logic just derails the entire logic tree by saying it'd be actually worse if Trump had charged the guy. Bro, what? So punishing someone for free speech to the legal system is bad, but punishing them without a legal process is somehow better? That's just backwards. And the justification he gives is straight from Reno via Anti-American Discrimination Committee case, saying deportation isn't a punishment, so it's all good. But that's missing the point. Just because the law says removal isn't a punishment doesn't mean it's suddenly immune from First Amendment scrutiny. That's what Pisco hammers home right after. Pisco brings up this really clean hypothetical. Like if the government said you can't get a liquor license for being Jewish or for supporting Trump, that's not a criminal penalty, but it's still a First Amendment issue. And Good Logic tries to dodge it again, calling it bona fide, but he never actually answers the question. He even tries to frame Pisco as going for a gotcha, but nah, Pisco just wants clarity. And when he corners him on whether the First Amendment only applies to criminal actions, Good Logic just shifts the goalposts again, and suddenly it's all about illegal aliens, which, again, doesn't even apply here. Pisco calls that out too. Mahmoud's not undocumented, so why does he keep pushing that frame?
Let me ask you guys for clarification, because the Immigration and Nationality Act, Section 221, subsection I, says after the issuance of a visa or other documentation to any alien, the consular officer or the Secretary of State may at any time, in his discretion, revoke such visa or other documentation. There's more to that. There's exceptions. I don't know that I need to read the whole thing. I think you're both familiar with this. So how does this pertain to Mahmoud?
Yeah. So there's wide deference in this country for the Secretary of State, for the Attorney General, for the Department of Homeland Security, for the President himself to make all kinds of decisions that would prejudice his right to be in this country. I don't deny that there's the case law is that there's no substantive right for non-citizens to be in this country, that Congress tomorrow could pass a law that says everyone who's not a citizen needs to leave. You don't have a substantive right to be here. But here's the question. Can you do it for illegitimate purpose that's reprehensible under the Constitution? Using the statute, not saying that the statute itself is unconstitutional facially, but as applied, could you say, for example, in my discretion, because you are a Jew, I am taking away your visa? The answer is no, right?
Well,
would you agree?
So far, what I've gotten from what you're saying is that it sounds like the reason the Trump administration has not accused him of a crime pertaining to those protests and has simply cited national security concerns is to avoid a hearing based on the arguments you're making.
Yeah, that's reprehensible, isn't it?
Well,
no,
I mean,
that's not what happens.
Well, but the issue is,
if it's true, would it be reprehensible to we're really doing this for the crime, but we're kind of sneaking it in? Wouldn't that be horrible?
I don't know that they're actually doing it for the crime. I'm saying, if Donald Trump said we don't want people who are not citizens to try and influence our government.
No. If it was a pretext, right? So if it were true that he wants to punish Mahmoud Khalil for actual criminal acts, but he's just trying to do it faster through this other method.
Well, there's a lot in there. The word punish, for instance. If I don't want to ascribe anything, and what I'm trying to get at is, if Donald Trump were to say we need pretext to remove this man, he's going to find himself in 1A hearings.
Would he find himself an enemy of you, or would you condemn him for coming up with pretexts to remove people or to punish people?
But again, just to clarify, because I want to make sure we get the full point before we get into that. The issue appears to be that the Secretary of State has the legal right for any reason in his own discretion at any time to revoke an alien's visa.
So Tim just keeps trying to play neutral while low-key just parroting the idea that, well, technically, the Secretary of State can revoke a visa at any time. Like, yeah, legally, discretion exists. But what PiscoLitty is doing is cutting through that BS by asking the real question. Can he use that discretion for an unconstitutionalized reason? And his example is airtight. If the Secretary revoked someone's visa because they're Jewish, is that even legit? Of course not. That's textbook unconstitutionalized discrimination. And Tim knows it, but he still stalls on giving an answer. Then when Pisco calls out the possibility that this was a pretext, that Trump or whoever used national security as a cover to avoid legal pushback, Tim just kind of floats around it. He never denies that possibility, but also refuses to condemn it. And it's wild because if someone is being targeted for protest activity, and you're just using visa discretion to sidestep criminal due process, that's basically soft authoritarianism. Like it's legal use weapons to avoid accountability. And right as Pisco pushes that point, like, isn't that kind of reprehensible? Tim just dodges again, and Good Logic jumps in, not to defend the Constitution, but to say that's just what happens. Like, bro, that's not a defense. That's an admission that the system can be abused, and you're cool with it because it's technically allowed. And it's not even about the law at that point. It's about power being used without limits. And Pisco's the only one at the table treating that as a real problem.
Under the law, but as applied, could they violate the Constitution? So I'll ask you, Tim, if he said, in my discretion, I'm going to revoke the visa because he's a Jew, you think that would be illegal?
revoke someone's visa for being a Jew.
Correct. In the exercise of discretion, would you say, for example, well, it says he can revoke it for any reason. Would you say that's legal?
It's a good question. What I would say is,
You can say I don't know.
I do want to address it real quick because my answer is I don't know, because you have two areas. One where the law literally says for any reason, but then you run into the constitutional argument where that law can't be applied as it goes to the First Amendment.
Yep.
So Tim, doesn't
I don't know.
But that's
doesn't the threshold the Supreme Court laid out that for some reason you just want to toss it, you want to just disregard completely when you give a crazy example of let's ban all Jews, let's ban all Muslims, let's ban all redheads, is that facially legitimate and bona fide? You seem to keep just walking, like dancing right past
No,
that.
I'm not.
That's the essence
I acknowledge that the
your
Chinese
hypotheticals are a joke because of that.
So
they don't meet that very tiny threshold.
So I want to be very clear. I started that entire conversation by saying the Chinese exclusion laws are still good law. And even though I don't necessarily agree with them. Wait, you think that Chinese exclusion laws are not good law?
What I'm saying is that as of today, you think it's legal today to exclude Chinese?
Immigration lawyers cite that case repeatedly, all the time, with respect to these kind of issues with constitutionality. Che Ching-ping, Fang Wei-ting, these are cases that the Supreme Court is, they constantly are cited there. They have not developed anti-precedent status yet. And I wanted, because you accused me of dancing around that issue, I started that conversation by saying and recognizing the law, which says that by the law, those cases have not been overturned. What I said was that's an exclusion decision. That's an exclusion decision that's different than when you're in the interior of the country.
So I have a question for you guys. And I think I have two questions. The first one's extremely obvious. If a black man walked into a bakery and they said, we don't serve black people, that is illegal.
That's illegal under the the civil rights framework.
Right.
It's private discrimination, different situation.
Right. So in the instance where the individual walks into the store and the owner says, sir, we reserve the right to refuse service to anybody, please leave.
Yeah.
Well, that's not an issue of racism or a violation of the Civil Rights Act.
That's a great example, Tim, and I really appreciate it because that goes to show you the extent to which the government actually has latitude in all kinds of. They could have done it through another means. They could have said, we're doing it because there's bullshit about the lie, which we can get into on your green card application. They could have found some other means. They could have charged them with a crime with a neutral ground, but they didn't. The reason they said it's because you support Hamas is because they're trying to signal, they're trying to bully private actors, just like they're doing with the universities, just like they're doing with the firms, just like we're doing with all these actors. They're trying to put a signal and say, hey, if you disagree with us on policy on Israel, we're going to make you hurt. And so you're right. If they actually thought he was a security threat, why not go through the other methods of doing so? But they said it specifically, and Rubio's coming out.
So this is about the Jews?
So Tim keeps dodging, he won't even say flat out that taking someone's visa away for being Jewish is unconstitutional. He dances around it with the whole I don't know bit, even when Pisco lays it out crystal clear. And when good logic tries to wave the whole thing off as some gotcha or joke hypothetical, it's just embarrassing. He completely misses the point. This isn't about theory, it's about how power can be abused when no one's willing to admit what's actually happening. Then Tim brings up that bakery example, and Pisco doesn't even flinch at that. He uses it to highlight how the government could have done things differently if this were about actual law enforcement. But it wasn't. They didn't go after Mahmoud for anything criminal. They didn't use a neutral process. They made it political. They made it about sending a message. If you speak out, we'll find a way to make you pay. And that's the tell right there. When people like Tim act confused about whether it's legal or not, when they hyper-focus on statutes while ignoring motive, what they're really doing is just giving cover for the targeted retaliation, just as long as it looks clean on paper. And that's the real bias here, pretending neutrality while defending a system that punishes dissent. And speaking of biases, are you getting tired of getting news from biased news sources? One outlet says one thing and another says the complete opposite? How are you supposed to know what's actually true? That's where ground news comes in. It lets you compare how different media outlets, whether it's left, right, or center, are covering the same story, so you can see the full picture instead of just the echo chamber. And here's the best part. Click the link in the description and get a 40% off the Vantage tier, which gives you even deeper insights in media bias and political trends. So stay informed, think for yourself, and check out ground news in the description down below.